So welcome. You're listening to a special and watching a special episode of In Tech, the podcast designed for diversity business tech leaders who really want to drive diversity and inclusion within their organization. We're here to offer you advice, help, inspiration to really move the dial within your company. Now, I'm not your typical host. I'm Debbie Forster, the CEO of the Tech Talent Charter, and I'm joining you here today because we're really excited to be talking about the sixth Diversity in Tech report that we're publishing this year. I know. So in terms of looking at this, back in the day, we weren't sure anyone was going to share data, but we now have data from over 650 organizations representing 70 verticals within tech. That makes it the richest, broadest, most in-depth report that allows us to look at what are the stats within tech, but also to understand what are the processes, what are the policies that are really moving the dial and allowing companies to benchmark against some key markers in ways they haven't been able to do before. Now, to dig into that report, who better to involve than Dr. Anne-Marie Imafidon. Now, Anne-Marie was one of our original founding group of the Tech Talent Charter.
We were so young, Debbie.
I know, babes in arms. Stemettes was one of our first signatories, yes. But that's not all that Anne-Marie does. Now, you may have seen her on Countdown. You may have realized that she is the founder herself of Stemettes, now 10 years. Yes. Happy birthday, darling. Again, as a child, again. You're also now the president of the British Science Association.
I am indeed, yes.
And she built in time on this busy day to come and join us. So thank you for joining us.
And I've authored a brand new book, She's in Control. I mean, it doesn't stop. I should
one day
sleep
you'll
sometime.
sleep. I was going to say one day you'll sleep, darling,
Maybe.
But not today because we're going to do a podcast.
Yes, let's do it.
So let's start talking first of all about gender. Okay, so you and I both, you came into tech yourself. You've been in the space trying to change it. We've both seen this for a while. Gender continues to be a problem. Mm-hmm. Well, we've seen some improvement in terms of looking at recruitment, but we know retention's not there. We know that our signatories are slightly ahead of the game, mm-hmm. but it's only gone up a couple of percent, up to 28%. Mm-hmm. And I think the thing that I find particularly discouraging is the fact that it's just 22% who are getting into leadership.
Yes.
All right. So, Anne-Marie, you've been doing this research. You've been looking at this. What's your view on this? What do you think what are you pleased about? What are you frustrated about?
So I'll start with what I'm pleased about. I mean, and Debbie, we've been doing this for a long time. 10 years ago when I started up Stemettes, it was very clear we need more women in this space. Formative years are incredibly important for how anyone sees themselves, but even more so how women see themselves and how they might see themselves technically. And so for me, at the beginning, the resistance that I got was, why are you doing this just for girls, right? Girls don't like the tech anyway. Yeah. Why are we singling them out? How are you even going to have anyone coming for the events, right? and then there was an even louder. The loudest thing was, why is this even a problem? Mm-hmm. And so I have to say, I have to be thankful. You have to express gratitude, right? As we now know in 2023, it's an important thing to do. And so I have to be thankful that in the last 10 years, I no longer have to explain that this is a problem.
Agreed.
In the majority of the conversations that I turn up to. And so I think, that we've gone from outright denial / confusion and misunderstanding and non-understanding to at least lip service. I think I can call that progress because the first steps you have to solving any problem is admitting that you have them. So I'd say that's the biggest leap I've definitely seen in the last 10 years is we will now say this is a problem. Even if folks aren't quite bringing their actions to meet up with knowing it's a problem, at least if we can say it and we're not wasting energy talking about that, I think that's important.
And it's exciting that companies are starting to realize that solving the problem has a benefit. This isn't just social justice, but actually fixing this problem is good for business, gets good products, good services. So we're seeing that starting to pull through.
Yes, and I am thankful that they are seeing it as social justice and something that they have a role to play in, which again, when we talk about what success might look like for technology as a field for technology companies, historically that's been money, right? Be the market share, all of that kind of thing. Whereas now we've almost got this kind of triple bottom line of profits, people and planet. And so actually, yeah, it's good enough for us to say it's the thing of social justice for you to have different types of people here, because there's a big impact in what you're doing. There's big reach of technology. And so no, for fairness, if we want to call it fairness, in terms of equality, in terms of equitable, whatever words each company is comfortable with, because again, we've had many discussions what people are, fairness.
What's your letters? What are your letters?
Yeah,
how are you going to use your letters?
And is EDI, and have we got B for belonging in the mix? There's all these things, but at least we all know, or folks are starting to cotton on to what is fair, what does justice look like, not just about this being about the bottom line. So I'm thankful for that, but again, we're just seeing initial sparks. It's not quite something that's deep set, and I think that speaks to the statistic that you're talking about. That 22% is, there's one thing to attract people in, but we have to be transformational internally to ensure that we can retain them. And we have to go even further to say there's enough value in them that we will promote them when we're supposed to promote them, and we'll respect them as leaders.
And it's just that too, isn't it? Because this is not about fixing the women.
No.
This is not about fixing people from ethnic minorities.
No.
Yes, they need training and support.
In some things.
But there needs to be intentional change to processes, to people, to managers, changing the carrots and the sticks. And
yes.
I think this is part of the problem. We are seeing the growth on recruitment, which is super. But as you say, if we're not really looking at the reasons why people are leaving, if we're not really looking at the reasons why they're not getting into management, and this is what's exciting in the report, is we're now starting to see what are the top strategies that companies are doing, what are the processes that are making a real difference. And that's both looking at that bullet list of what can happen, but also hearing from companies that are making that difference. Nobody's telling us they've got it fixed. No. But we're seeing the seeds of growth. And that's one of the things in the report that I think companies can look at. They can benchmark themselves. This is the first time that we can benchmark companies, so they can look at companies of their sector, of their size, of their region, to see how they measure up.
And that's one of the things that I love about being involved with TTC. Stemettes is a signatory. We were there, in the early days, figuring out these details. But I think having things like the playbook there as a resource, and I've had this conversation with you kind of off air, I want more folks that aren't just signatories to see this and learn from this. I think there is that thing of seeing practice. We don't have to call it best practice, but seeing practice, and not just the results, right? And not just the end result of the practice, but also the processes. Because as we know, and you see it across signatories, you see it across industries, what a change to this promotion process means in this organization might not necessarily directly translate for the culture you have in such and such organization. But if they can follow that framework or follow that thought process, they can say, okay, cool, here's what that means to us. Here's what we value in this. Here's a helping hand, but also a kind of a comparison that we can do, that benchmarking of going on that process to ensure that we are doing better. But as I say to companies all the time when I'm doing, my talks, we all have seen the agile framework at this point, right? Continuous improvement, right? We have to be iterative about it. Yes. And I think that's what's great. I said the whoop at the 6 years is we're able to be iterative. We're able to build, measure and learn from having reports like TTC, the TTC report, having the benchmarking to say, this is what we did last year, here's where we ended up. Here's what we did the year before, and that's where we got to. So therefore this year, what's the next tweak, right? Yes. What's the next edit? What's the version 3.1 to version 3.2 even? How are we making that, and what's the direction of travel? And I think that's the important thing. We have to be heading in the right direction, not just viewing this as we need to be at that destination.
And getting comfortable with it is not going to be a perfect linear process.
Exactly.
One of the things I've loved since the start is the humility and the willingness of companies to talk about, this is what we tried to do. This is why it didn't work. This is how we fixed it. This is how we pivoted. But data driven and looking at that. And so I think it's powerful for companies to hear that journey, hear the mistakes as well as the successes.
Definitely.
So they can adapt that and they can take that through. Now, we began back when we were first talking about this only about gender, but it was the pledge that it had to be about the whole 360. So we're now going into our third year. This is the second year in which we're requiring companies to talk to us about ethnicity and measuring ethnicity. The stats again, better than we're looking at the norm, although if you look at regionally, of course London has to look different, and there's a way for companies to look at that, but we see even more exaggerated the problems of getting ethnic minorities into leadership and management. you've been battling this since the start in Stemettes as well. We've seen some gestures, not always actions. From your perspective, if I'm a company, what must I be doing to really move the dial in terms of ethnicity?
So I think companies need to be listening. And this is one that is tough to do. Like, listening is we think it's a lot easier than it is. We almost underrate it as well. But I think being able to truly listen and hear, not to provide a response or to defend what has gone on.
That's really key.
But to understand. I think that's what's going missing at the moment. And it's still something that's not quite happening. There are lots of groups that have started up, lots of groups that existed already, right, that are along this ethnicity lens. And I think it's the frustrations that I hear again and again and again is, like you said, we were just brought in to look a particular way. We were brought in to dance, right, and follow the dance. And it's like there was no understanding or listening to what we said. And it wasn't the right kind of depth of hearing, and so therefore the depth of action, because gestures are still actions, but they're not the kinds of actions that move the needle. Not enough of that then goes on behind the scenes, or not enough of that then goes on. And so, but I think the other thing is for folks to listen outside of work. And again, I say this to companies a lot, like, where are you spending? You've got things like Black Pound Day, for example, right? Where are you spending? What do your supply chains look like? What are you reading? There's a Black Ballot, there's a Galdem. Like, how are you seeing the perspectives and understanding them, and being able to say, okay, cool, this isn't an isolated case, or this isn't just someone being difficult in our organization, or this isn't someone that just doesn't look like a leader, but how are you then able to recognize your own worldview so you can see that value in different places in different ways? And I think that's one way. I think the other thing is, when we talk about ethnicity, a lot of what we do is global. And so sometimes I do have to ask folks to reflect, if that's what you're doing for folks that are here in this locale with you, how are you treating the folks that aren't in this locale, right? And what processes do or don't you have internationally that means that actually where this looks like ethnicity here, it becomes a wider cultural issue. And so there's a lot, but it starts with genuinely listening, hearing to understand, not to defend. And the folks that are able to do that and say, actually, I know that there are things that we have done that have been, if not pro-racist, or if not racist in themselves, they haven't been anti-racist. And this isn't about statements. No. This isn't about pledges. This isn't, like you said, about gestures, but it's where have you spent that money? Who have you sponsored? Again, not in the financial sense, but who have you put forward for those opportunities? Who have you allowed to stand in your place? And how are you ensuring that, again, the outputs of what you do as an organisation don't then contribute to systematically ensuring those things happen?
Absolutely. And
I talk about this in the book, in my book, She's in Control, where, technology is about power. Technology is about power. It's about solutions, right? And it's like, okay, cool. And we're solving problems. And who are we solving those problems for?
Absolutely.
Because when you start to unpick that and understand that, then you can see how maybe it's not possible for someone of a different ethnicity to thrive in your organisation, if that's the nature of projects that you are taking on, and therefore that's the value set you have, and that's always going to run counter to who they are and how they are.
And I think this is what we're seeing of those companies who are moving forward. A lot of them are in these early days where it is the awareness raising, it is that education piece, that listening. And I think the key will be those companies who genuinely are listening and then sitting with those uncomfortable truths.
Exactly.
And really going back to quite basic structures, as you're saying. And it is, we've said it, earlier about the women. This is not about fixing the underrepresented groups. This is about what is the majority doing and changing in terms of our outlooks, our attitudes, our processes, all the way through to really try and make that through.
Exactly. And we can't fix, we have to be really clear on that. We can't fix, I know, folks will get to see the report a lot more, but even when we talk about something about the pipeline, when we look at that as a concept, when we look at the statistics and the numbers of that and how that is split gender-wise, but also how that's split ethnicity-wise, there are a lot of folks that are being left in the table, a lot of folks being left in that pipeline, right?
Absolutely, and left behind.
Exactly. And so, there's still so much more that you can actually get pretty quick and big gains.
Absolutely.
When you make those right edits and have the right kind of transformation and, like you said, tough conversations. This is not easy. It's really hard. There will be eggs broken. There will be mistakes made, but you have to make those so that you can make better mistakes and make the right kind of progress.
And it's got to have that intentionality.
And I got this from you, Debbie. You have to be intentionally inclusive. Otherwise, you're unintentionally excluding.
Absolutely.
And it's being intentional. And it's something as well from Abadesi Osunsade at the Hustle Crew. And she always draws this parallel of kind of the analogy of spell check.
Yes.
Right, which I'm sure you've got in the playbook now, actually.
Yes,
but
yes.
you know, this idea of, we all remember a time when you type in Word and you'd write your document, la 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 la, and you switch on spell check, and then all of a sudden, red and green lines everywhere, and you're like, what? And now it's just how we write documents. I mean, at this point, we've got ChatGPT, right?
Exactly.
So the documents are writing themselves. But it's like, you know, what journey can we go on in terms of belonging? Every time you run a meeting, every time you send an email, every time you make a decision, every time you have an interaction, how are you doing that belonging check rather than spell check on that to ensure that we are doing that in the small, not always, you know, everything's not all about big gestures. It is also about in the small. How are we doing that to ensure, how are we doing that to ensure that we are then moving in the right direction? And it's important to, you know, be intentionally inclusive, but also look for that belonging. Like, how are we ensuring that different types of folks belong to the processes that we're
and
in
we
and
see them
Yes.
and see them get to the tops of those processes.
Yeah, they have to belong in order for them to be leaders. Yeah,
Absolutely. And then if we have those leaders, we have those role models that pull that all the way through and begin to start repairing the whole of the pipeline.
and then we can all go home. Can all go do something else, Debbie.
So talk to me then, because we've been talking very much about the workplace, but the pipeline is not fixed by any mean as well. And this is very much where you're operating in that respect. What do we need to remember as companies when we're looking at that early pipeline piece? Why is that important?
It's just to have an understanding of what happens next. And this is something that, you know, often we have to work through organizations with this. You know, equity is a big part of what we do at Stemettes. The youth voice is central to what we're doing. Youth focused is one of our values. We have the Stemettes Futures Youth Board. We have Stemettes Futures Junior Board. So, you know, the 6 to 12-year-olds are also in there being like, what about this? What about that? And we're listing and we take them very seriously. But it's so important to be able to learn from them and to understand the difference. And I think this is something that ends up, you know, folks end up learning a lot. You know, volunteers come, they have so much value, not only because they get to remember why they enjoy what they're doing. You know, it's funny that when you're selling it to others and you're like, this is great, and at this company we do this, and you're like, yeah, it's kind of great. Cool. Yeah.
So I love that moment when the lights got on and they're like, oh my God, I do love my job. Like, this is actually a really cool job. What am I doing?
It doesn't feel like that when I'm on the calls all the time, but you know, and so I think that's important, but also that element of listening. And for me, it's always quite telling actually for certain companies that when we work with them, and you know, volunteers are like, oh no, but the kids must do this and they have to do that. And you know, thinking of equitable practice, we had this a lot when we went virtual. The kid must have their camera on. Why don't they have their microphones on? And it's like, okay, cool. We understand why you do that and why that's a norm for you in the workplace. But actually, when we think about the different types of folks that we have, you know, I'm thinking and worrying for some of your colleagues, where if that's what you're saying for our teenagers, how much more are you doing that to your colleagues who have various different reasons why their cameras may or may not be on?
Who won't be broadcasting and working their Zoom from their library.
Thank you. You know, and it's all these things where it's like, actually, there's a lot that you can then learn in this environment with these young people. And so I think that's the other reason why investing in the pipeline, investing in young people ends up then providing all kinds of benefits for folks to just have an understanding, again, outside of your normal circle, outside of the folks you socialize with, come and understand some of these problems. And they may give you insights for your products.
Yes.
You know, if you want to be very selfish in that way, they may give you insights for your supply chain. They may give you insights for the new members of your team that you're trying to recruit and that you're trying to hire. And again, you know, it's been 10 years, so many stories of this. One company we work with, no names at all, probably not even timelines. We had their head of HR was the person that contacted us and said, Mr. Metz, we want to work with you. They clearly had a fight internally to be able to make this event happen. We never get told any of these details. No. We just, you know, turn up, we run our events, we bring the young people, we work with them, and we come to the judging element of the hackathon. And the senior person who really didn't want to work with us ends up being plopped on this judging panel, and by the end wants to hire every single girl that he's seen present. And you know, and this HR lead comes back and is like, I could have never, you know, I've been begging him, you wouldn't. And meanwhile he's like, yeah, got the name, got the details. As soon as you're legally, as soon as you graduated, you need to come back here. And it's things like that where it's like, actually then investing allows you to see that in a way that you might not get to see in your day-to-day across the industry.
And I think that works both ways, because we talk, don't we, sometimes that it's so important for some people who are underrepresented to see someone in tech, to see someone in, and that builds that sense of social capital that I could do that, I can get into tech. But it goes the other way.
100%.
It's when we're doing events like this, we're moving beyond those stereotypes. This is a girl, this is somebody from an ethnic minority, this is somebody from socioeconomic challenging. And we start seeing the humans.
Exactly.
The light goes on.
And the value in those different types of humans, which, you know, if we go back to all of this, that's what all of this is about, right? There's certain things we see and we're like, okay, cool, that person has kids that they're looking after. You know, there's not as much value in them for me because they can't spend all their time at the office. And it's like, no, there's values in the different life experiences. And the more that you're exposed to those, the more you see that, then the more you can kind of drop your guard on, this is what good must look like. And good has to look this way. You know, and you're allowed to see multiplicities of good, multiplicities of value, multiplicities of success. And I think that's where we then start to get to, you know, what the big vision is of Tech Talent Charter and Stemettes.
So, Anne-Marie, we could do this for days, you and I, you know, I don't know. And then
sorry, listener, we won't. We promise we won't.
You don't need to have
a look
dinner.
At the screen. It
you
does
don't
come
need to go
an
into
end.
work.
Yeah.
No. You're going to be fine. So to bring it to a conclusion, in every episode, what we try to do is we ask each guest to give us some tangible advice. You know, I'm always about, and then what do you do next? So we break that down into 3 minutes, 3 weeks, and 3 months. So if you're going to give advice to someone listening on them, what they could do in 3 minutes, 3 weeks, and 3 months, and I'll throw some in too. What would you do? So I've got 3 minutes. Podcast is coming to end. What can I do?
So 3 minutes, I would like for you to go back over what we've just spoken about. Like what are there are a few things that we will have said that have resonated. Write them down. Like write them down. There's definitely going to be 3 things that you're like, oh, I want to unpick that a little bit more. I want to understand the equity compass. Like, you know, I want to go and look for that, right? So I think in the 3 minutes is note down genuinely from this podcast now. There's so much that we've said.
Super.
Go and unpack that. Go and understand what it is and write yourself a to-do list on things that you're going to follow up on.
And I'd want you to go onto the website, download the report. Have a look at that, read the report, have a look around in terms of the things that you're going to do and start working on that.
Have the notes. I mean, to go to my website, go buy the book. I'm joking though.
Of course, as if they haven't bought it already and it's sitting on the table beside them each night when they're doing that, etc.
In 3 weeks, I think there is something around the conversations that you can have with others to go back to the iterations that you're on now. So if you're listening to this, I'm really, really hoping that when we talked about the idea of doing those experiments, right, the idea of being iterative, the idea of kind of coming back, that you'd have a reflection process anyway, but go and have a check-in on what have we tweaked since the last time we had a look back at those numbers, or since the last time we did, you know, since we said we were going to set up that new network, the Affinity network at work, since we said we were going to, I don't know, progress a particular framework, like go back and have a look, have a check-in on what is going on already. Because what I don't always want as well is for folks to just create new work out of thin air without linking it to what has gone on already. And if you're listening to this in 3 weeks' time, hopefully from the conversations you're having as well, there will be something to go and check back in with. This is all very meta, so I don't know if this is the right.
No, this is perfect. Again,
okay, cool.
And we, you know, and if somebody's saying, "Oh, but I don't know what we've done, or I don't know a plan," within the report, now we have the elements of a DEI plan. So if you're much more basic in that, starting from scratch, there are things that you can begin picking up to start working on those sorts of things. Brilliant. Absolutely.
And then for 3 months, I think my thing would be, we need to be continuously hearing that difference, continuously taking in that difference. So in 3 months, what is the different media, you know, outlet? What is the different newsletter? What is the different social media influencer, if it really must be, like thought leader? Like, who are the different folks that are different from not just you, but different from the norm of who you listen to, who you read, who you ingest, that you're going to ensure that you've actually caught up on 3 months worth of their content? Okay. Whatever it might be, whoever they may be. And like I mentioned a couple of names, so go back, you know, this will be part of your rewind, right? You write your 3 minute,
absolutely.
Go back and make sure that you're listening, you're following, you're reading, you're understanding, you're taking something different in from what you were already listening to. And sometimes it can be as controversial as listening to that right wing, whatever, like go and hear what the other side is saying, because it is important to build that understanding.
No, absolutely.
Because a lot of things come from fear, a lot of things come from things other than just folks being ill-informed. And that has to be, you have to be ready to be okay with the difference and embrace it.
And engage.
Even if you don't agree with it. Which I think is the other thing, right? We end up in these bubbles where it's like, I'm only going to listen to people I agree with. No. You have to listen to people you don't agree with. You have to be able to do that.
And listen and hear, like you were talking about, not the moral outrage and just listening to hear why they're wrong, but to engage.
Yeah, hear the details. There might be something you need to do differently. There might be something you need to counter. There might be something you need to amp up that you are already doing that actually isn't clear enough. And that's what you're hearing from other people's anxieties, other people's fears, other people's communication. So, tap into all of that. And that's it. I mean, it's 3 different ways to listen, really. But
And I think what I would say from the sort of planning, because what worries me is you get that enthusiasm. You listen, you engage, you come up with your plan and you launch it and then wander off to the next bright, shiny thing. What I'd love for people to do is to start circling back. What have we achieved on that plan? What have we measured? Where did we get to?
What did we learn?
What's going wrong?
Yeah.
How do we fix? How do we pivot? Those sorts of things.
You have to go back. And I think, if we go back to some of the questions you asked earlier, that's the frustration is folks come, they do the gesture, they release the statement, never to be referred to, remembered, even acknowledged ever again. And that's not, there's so many organisations that I've worked with over the last couple of years where I've had to say, put down the statement, put it down. I'm not editing your statement. I'm not commenting on it. I'm not adding a quote to it. What have you done? Let's talk after the fact. Let's say, here's what we did and we'll continue to do, not we pledged to, without any structure, any kind of, any of the backing.
Where I grew up and stuff, there'd be phrases of fixing to, and I'm tired of people fixing to fix something. I just get on with it and then review and
do the deep work, and it will take time and it will be hard, but you have to, get on it, man. This is so important, folks. So this is the thing. This is so important. Like the opportunity, the responsibility that we have. We forget about it. We take it almost too lightly. And then you look out in the real world, you look beyond your own nose, beyond your own circumstances. There are a lot of problems out there that we could genuinely be, the power is in our hands to solve those problems.
But it's not linear. It's one, it's done, and we never look back. It's understanding it is an ongoing progress, and it's always under threat if we become complacent, if we become...
It's not deterministic. I mean, that's the other thing, right? As much as I'm a technologist, it's probably the only... I'm like, life is much harder than maths.
I'm putting... That's a tattoo, isn't it? There's a tattoo in that.
I wish this was just, you write the code, you compile it, life's good, and you get on with it. But it's not. We're talking about human beings. They're much more complex, not as deterministic.
Can't debug them.
You cannot successfully debug them. And believe me, I've tried. So, I think we do have to have that, there are elements of that technological approach that we can take, but we have to remember these are human beings we're talking about at the end. So
there you have it. All right, everyone. That brings us to the end of the episode. Anne-Marie, thank you so much for joining us. I know how crazy busy your schedule is, and it is great. And get to doing it like in 3D.
I know,
we don't get to meet in 3D. It's all very exciting.
To touch you and everything.
In appropriate ways and in a professional sort of way. Yes, absolutely. It's just for me to say a huge thank you to CW Jobs, to DCMS, to HP, to Lloyds Banking Group, to PwC, Nominet, and for Global for supporting the production of the report, and to my wonderful guest. Of course, for all of you for listening. You can find the full report at techtalentcharter.co.uk. You can find it on LinkedIn, or we're also on Twitter at TechCharterUK. If you like what you've heard and you'd like to subscribe to the podcast on Global Player or your preferred platform. So I'm Debbie Forster. Please join me again for On Tech, the Diversity Inclusion podcast from the Tech Talent Charter.